Can citizens make a difference in this country? And is our Constitution outmoded? And what are we going to do about it? What's the action we can take as citizens? That's what we're going to talk about with our next guest.
A clear path forward requires looking back and learning. Good public policy requires human connection. It's a consideration of the facts, applying common sense, and innovation. It's urban, it's rural, it's real life. We all have something to contribute. We all have a responsibility to get informed because there's a little piece of Canada in all of us, isn't there? Let's learn on this path together. This is Leaders on the Frontier.
Well, with me here today to talk about citizenship and what we can do in this country, I'm very excited to have with us our next guest, Cory Morgan. Cory is a great columnist. He's an author, and he's with the Western Standard. So a warm welcome to you, Cory Morgan.
Great. Thanks, David. Glad to be on.
Well, Cory, I very much enjoyed reading a number of years ago your book called The Sovereigntist Handbook, Charting the Course to Western Independence. So there's a lot to unpack here as it relates to today when we see all kinds of current issues and challenges facing our countries and citizens. And it begs the question in my mind about many things, including the state of our Constitution. And I think that's a key thing that you've certainly written about extensively. But let's talk about our Constitution. How is it biased against Western Canada?
Well, where to start? I mean, we have, for example, our most powerful legislature among the houses is the Parliament, House of Commons, and it's based on representation by population. The Senate ostensibly is supposed to help balance that, but again, we've got an out-of-date constitution that has an appointed Senate that isn't actually regionally equal, actually not even slightly close. So when we come to who's going to take power within Canada politically and democratically, but to get elected to the House of Commons, of course, you need to pursue the votes where the majority of votes are, and that naturally lands in central Canada. It forces politicians to maintain a bias towards central Canada with policies, with actions, again, whether they might even not mean to be doing so, but if they want to stay in power, they have to cater to central Canada, and that's been the nature of Canada since the West was an agricultural small factor within Confederation to even today, when it's a quite powerful block of resource-rich provinces that are quite well populated and developed. We still tend to find ourselves kind of playing second banana on the legislative front.
So it's kind of a frustrating situation as you kind of outline it that way. It does kind of make sense that the Constitution is kind of biased and tilted away from Western Canada. So I guess the question is, what can we do about it, Cory? Is there an obvious approach there that needs to happen?
Well, yeah, and that's some of the frustration. I mean, I feel a healthy Constitution should be a living document. You don't want to be changing it all the time, but it should be updated, refreshed. The world has changed a heck of a lot in the last 100 and some years. And our last serious attempts to change the Constitution were Meech Lake and Charlottetown. Neither of them came even close to coming through. And personally, I don't feel those were very radical changes being proposed with those. So if we want to remedy the constitutional issue we have within Canada, the formula for change the bar is set so high that we would have to hit an actual constitutional crisis of some sort before enough of the country is motivated to tackle that. And I can't see any crisis other than a province being either right on the brink of secession or having actually voted in a referendum saying, we've had enough, we're going to move on and start out on our own. So I've kind of been working towards bringing that goal about, or encouraging people to realize and come to the same conclusion as me. I mean, we're still a long ways from any viable movement for a successful independence vote in the West, but it's growing. And in Quebec, it's been very interesting to watch it flaring up out there again, which again illustrates how difficult our system is when we have regions so discontent within the Confederation.
Indeed. So why does this issue matter to Canadians? Is there a lot of money flowing out of the West to the rest of the country? And quite frankly, it undermines our standard of living? Or how does this really impact Canadians?
Yeah, well, on the economic front, I mean, the Western independence movement is very economic based. I mean, when you look on the surface, it just if you're going to coldly look at it from an economic point of view, we aren't doing very well and being well served within Confederation. Equalization, transfer programs, the way the civil service is set up, the way EI is set up, the way pension is set up, we pretty much kind of get a bad return on our dollars on every front. It's been hundreds and hundreds of billions sent to Ottawa just through equalization alone without a return in services. Or I know that equalization, we don't technically send money to them, but we send money to Ottawa through taxes, and we don't get them transferred back because the equalization program doesn't allow for that in Alberta. So on that economic front, and people dependent, I guess, provinces dependent on that equalization. If the flow dried up, it would have a negative impact upon them. But that gets to the economic question, though. Has equalization really been helping those provinces? Have the Maritimes really gotten a lot stronger due to transfer payments or preferential EI standards for collection and things such as that? Or has it actually kept them in a rut when perhaps they should have been developing other industries or moving to where the industries are developed?
So that strikes me as a very good insight, that it's a bit like, notorious kind of welfare dependency for provinces when you have equalization payments going to other provinces. I think Quebec is the largest recipient. I think it's, $24 billion every year. It's huge. That just results in a larger state apparatus that in turn kind of undermines the country's economy. So it's kind of a vicious cycle, isn't it, Cory?
Absolutely, and we look in Quebec where they banned natural gas development. I mean, they have actually some very sizable natural gas reserves within Quebec, and they could be developed. There were companies, I believe, they're suing them now because they got shut down, that could be developing and bringing those resources out and helping Quebec. Quebec wouldn't dare do such a thing if they weren't getting their budgets shored up through transfer payments and equalization. I mean, this is stunting them from developing their resources. And the hypocrisy of, okay, well, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Northern BC, you guys develop all that natural gas and oil, and we'll just kind of take our bite off of the revenues collected from it. But at the same time, we won't do that in our own backyard over here. And again, it's stunting the natural development of Canada economically through these programs. But what can we do about it? That's where we keep hitting that brick wall of the Constitution. Equalization's entrenched the number of seats in the Senate and other such things, the remedies that might change it. We would need to reform the Constitution, and I just can't see those reforms coming.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's a pretty steep hill to climb up, isn't it, to reform that Constitution if we think of all those grim memories of Meech Lake Accord and Charlottetown and all the rest. Who wants to go back there? But to the point, it is interesting when we think of, say good public policy. One of the things that we value, of course, is accountability and transparency, simplicity, if you will. And we think of equalization payments. I think there's probably a handful of people that even understand this complex formula. What I find fascinating is that the formula doesn't take into account hydro revenues, but it does take into account oil and gas revenues. Isn't that kind of unfair?
It's absolutely unfair. And I mean, some of the justification, which I find kind of odd and absurd, is that the hydro, they say, well, it's because it's not a non-renewable resource. It's ongoing. Well, again, that tells me we should be, making the most out of the non-renewable ones and accepting that they've got a solid, constant, long-term revenue base from the hydro. It's a very good example of where policy and such has been, again, stacked to serve Central Canada, where they have abundant hydro resources, and Western Canada doesn't have those. So, they're taking the money in, and they don't have to sign it up as saying that they collected it, I guess, when they make their welfare application, and they can take the full amount. It's just, even if you agree with equalization, it's not a fair setup for it.
Yeah. So fairness is really an important question here. So I can understand where you're coming from on these very important questions. So speaking of provinces then in the West, do you think then the strategy then of, frankly, increased fairness is for those provinces in Western Canada to demand, frankly, the same amount of powers and treatment as a province called Quebec. In other words, part of the strategy is to put it crassly, to pull a Quebec. And if they have a separate pension system, if they have a separate way of going about things, the rest of us should say, us too.
Well, yes, absolutely. And that's, we've been watching that in action. Premier Smith and Premier Moe actually have been quite outspoken in defense of Western interests lately, much
Indeed.
more than we've seen in a long time with the Sovereignty Act and things such as that. And you get to see that double standard with the establishment when the things that Alberta is asking for, as you said, with a provincial police force, a pension plan, things such as that, we're not asking for anything that other provinces don't already enjoy. Yet somehow
Precisely.
we're immediately labeled as selfish and mean spirited and being unreasonable when we ask for these things. And people forget, well, Ontario has their own police force, Quebec has their own pension plan. Why is it wrong for us to ask for those things out there? For ourselves that they're enjoying in the East. And again, it shows that divide, even if it's not conscious. You see it again through legacy media, through politicians. Albertans are the bad guys when they ask for these things, and Quebec is entitled and has the right to do so when they do. And that's what tends to infuriate a lot of people on the ground.
No, those are excellent points, Cory. So as we reflect on the state of affairs in 2024, we look at what seems to be a consistent heavy-duty pattern of the federal government really intruding in provincial lanes of constitutional jurisdiction and really attack on many parts of Western Canada's economy, including the oil and gas sector. I mean, it's pretty stunning. So are you seeing the same pattern, Cory, from your point of view?
Yeah, and we expect it from the oil and gas. That seems to have just been the trend from Liberal governments ever since Pierre Trudeau was in. Again, the irony was they benefit quite well from the extraction of these resources. The whole country does. But they just seem to loathe it at the same time and try to put as many blockages ahead of us. I mean, the emissions cap is very, very distressing and worrisome for conventional energy producers in Western Canada. At the same time, when you get in the intrusions into provincial jurisdiction, we're seeing it all over and chronically, whether it's the announcements of a dental plan. And it's like they're setting political traps for our provincial leaders. Premier Smith is not, Justin Trudeau announces a great big expensive dental plan for people. Premier Smith says, well, we don't want to jump into that plan. In fact, it's healthcare, it's provincial jurisdiction. We have provincial plans for that. Transfer us the money and we could, enhance our services that way, but we're not taking part. Well, then she gets labeled as again, being insensitive, being overly politicized, or being idealistic for turning down money that Justin Trudeau is handing out to us. It's a recipe for ongoing political battles between the provinces and the federal government, and people aren't asking often enough, well, wait a minute, is it the role of the federal government to bring in provincial dental plans? Is it the role of the federal government to bring in lunch bag programs for children? Or, a lot of these, or housing transfers, a lot of these things, again, they aren't the turf of the federal government. And once they're entrenched, well, then they've got more actually direct control over us out here. And it's a problematic trend.
Yeah, so what's your hypothesis then, Cory, of why the federal government is so consistently getting out of their lane and going into provincial responsibilities? Why is that?
It's a trend of authoritarianism. You want control. It's in the nature, I think, of people who rise up in governments. Unfortunately, to be honest, in Alberta, we're seeing it on a different level where Premier Smith is going into some pretty pitched battles with mayors into municipal jurisdiction, which as a premier, she can, because the municipalities are a creation of the provincial government, actually. But she's not exercising the same devolution of power or decentralization of it that she's asking of Ottawa, because governments find it a lot easier to get things done if, or at least they feel they'll find it easier to get done if they've just taken control of these things directly themselves and can kind of push aside the person standing there who actually has the jurisdiction. So I think there's some of that going on. If they can have a handle on these things, they feel they could manage the entire country better, which personally, I don't think they've managed the country very well at all. So I don't think this tactic's working, but it's just in their nature to keep trying to grab control where they can.
No, I think that's a very good point, Cory. So I like your vision that the levels of government should kind of mind their own business and do their work well. Whether it's the federal government with, say, well, what is it? Free trade, the military, all kinds of very important responsibilities. But the provinces need to empower local governments to do their business. And to me, that's a very important principle, isn't it? Is that we have subsidiarity, the notion that power and authority should be as close to the people as possible. Like, what does Ottawa know about our lives? Not much, do they?
No, absolutely not. And as we said, to be fair, and I'm quite a fan of the UCP government to a degree anyways, but I'll still be critical of them at times. It's just that they just can't seem to resist themselves and going into different areas. You know, when I'm looking in Alberta, Calgary's needs are going to be much different than the needs of Northern Alberta and Grand Prairie. And Grand Prairie's needs are going to be much different than the small town in Taber in Southern Alberta. The best way to serve those needs is to give as much local authority as you possibly can to the people who are there. Right. And they haven't been doing that, not as much. And I know some people point out there's been some terrible municipal governments, sure, and there's been some terrible premiers, but it should be the voters remedying that, not the next level of government up. So if voters are engaged and empowered, they can fix these problems rather than having big government come in and say that they're going to fix it on their behalf.
That's right. So, you know, as I'm listening to your articulation of these challenges and issues and solutions, it makes a lot of sense why you wrote this book, The Sovereigntist Handbook. Can you tell us more about why you finally put pen to paper on that one?
Sure. Well, you know, and I've been active in this since I was a lot less gray. I was only 29 when I founded the Alberta Independence Party. I'd been politically active since my early 20s with Reform Party and such. And I'd come to the conclusions that we were hitting a stalemate and we needed something to shake up the status quo, and independence I saw as the path towards doing it. But I really didn't have a clue what I was doing. You know, we did shake a lot of things up. We did make a lot of noise. We did do a lot of organizing, and over years I did, you know, take part in several elections. But what I started seeing now, and as I kind of moved out and I got into the Wild Rose Party and things that were a little more mainstream and learned more, but I'm seeing independence movements, people reaching the same conclusion I did, but they're also making the same mistakes I did. So perhaps it's time to document at least what's already been done. If we're concluding we want to see the same end game, fine. But this book is more instructional almost. It's saying, well, if we're going to promote this concept, if we're going to move it ahead, there's lots of people saying why independence should be an option, but nobody really wrote on how we're going to get there. And that's more what this book is about. It's how to become politically active, everything from getting involved in a local political party if you're going to, or just some of the basic talking points for independence, or even just taking care of yourself. People burn themselves out in politics. They take it too seriously. Take a break now and then. Don't sacrifice the important things like your family for political efforts. And people keep learning that the hard way. Well, there's no sense relearning it. Let's do it right.
Well, I certainly enjoy the book. I recommend it to people, Cory. But one of the things I did like about it is that, again, you focused on more about the how. Can citizens actually make a difference, would be my question then to you, Cory.
Yes, and they most definitely can. I mean, our system is still actually not that bad for people if they want to take part in it. If they will become engaged, if they'll become active, they can very much influence political policy, political directions, and even as something as major as an independence movement. As I note in the book, it's only 2 to 3% of Canadians are even members in a political party.
2 to 3%. That's it. Wow.
That's it. And, you know, once in a while, you'll see a little spike with a leadership race going on or something when heavy sales have happened. But even then, that only brings up to 5-6%. And those memberships tend to expire after the race. So these are the number of people that are actually influencing and controlling the political party who may be in power in your province. So you're actually being governed by a much smaller minority than you think. And it's not that hard to join a party. But you know what? There's no instructions anywhere. How do you join a party? You know, what happens when you join a party? What does a membership entitle you to? What can you do within a party once you're a member? So again, I put that within the book because it can be a bit intimidating for people. They didn't teach you that in school. You go to a meeting, it might seem as if everybody knows what they're doing and you don't, you know, when you're the new guy. Well, here's the basics. It's not that hard, actually. And letting more people know and realize that, yes, you can take part and you can have a very real influence as far as you want to go, whether you want to go as far as being a candidate or just somebody who shows up at meetings and expresses their view to neighbors here and there on what they feel on politics. But there is room to make a difference, and we do have a system that allows you to if you'll take advantage of it.
I think you make a brilliant point, Cory. If you take advantage of it, I think a lot of Canadians would be shocked that such a tiny, tiny number of Canadians actually participate. And for me, it begs the question, have you noticed a trend where it seems like the political forum is dominated by special interests or activist groups? They're funded by who knows whom. It could even be specialty activist foundations out of the United States, like, I'm thinking of, I could mention a myriad of them, let alone the taxpayer. So are you noticing the rise of, dare I say, fake citizens, people who are protesting all the time? We see them, but they're on the payroll. Is that what you're seeing as well, Cory?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a disproportionate amount, it seems, of noise and visibility of some activist groups, and it's a left and right thing. It's not exclusive to either. Mm-hmm. And again, if they know how to use the mechanisms of public discourse on how to bring block voting into party functions, things like that, and have an influence. So we're seeing more of it. And we're seeing it on the streets and protests, things such as that. And there's interests that are paying for these things to happen. Mm-hmm. But if people will get up and get active, they can overpower that. There's still only so much these groups can do.
Okay. But one of the things I was very curious about asking you about, Cory, is the state of Canada in 2024. We've seen a lot of concerns about many policies affecting, frankly, the affordability of people's lives. We've got a declining standard of living. But it strikes me that there seems to be green shoots of renewal happening in our country as people kind of rise up and get involved. And they really want to have a voice in the renewal of this country. I think that the numbers of people involved in the UCP are testimony to that. I also look at, in BC, a fascinating story of how there was a BC Conservative Party that kind of came out of the blue, pardon the pun, and ended up giving the incumbent NDP party a run for its money. And now the NDP will be establishing a bare majority party. And there's other parts of that in the rest of the country as well. So are you seeing that as positive signs that people want to be more involved as part of that populist movement? They don't want to just sit back and let the so-called elites of the country, the so-called special interests of the country run our lives. Are you seeing the same trend?
Most definitely. There's a chafing against I guess you could call it the establishment. And I believe that's what happened with the BC Liberal Party when they were acting as if old party style. They were being very selective on who could run for them. They were taking very middle of the road stances, being mushy. People wanted change, and the Conservatives offered that, and Rustad, really pulled them together. Took a party from what it had 2% support 18 months ago to being right on the edge of actually winning government, and he's got a very strong opposition mandate now, and there's a very humbled NDP sitting in there that realizes that if they want to be more than one term after this, they're going to have to be more pragmatic in their policies. That took ground organization an amazing amount, and people getting up to say, yes, I've had it with the status quo. I want something fresh. And it can be dangerous. Populism, it's funny, we see again, some people spit it out as if it's a bad thing, and it can be. I mean, there's been some populist movements that were reactionary to factors, and people did some terrible, terrible things. I don't see that coming at this point, but we do have to be careful with populism. I mean, if people are all worked up over something, they can embrace some damaging policies in the long run too. You don't want the mob getting together, but I don't see that. I see that as engaged citizens right now. I mean, we didn't see people screaming in the streets or suppressing votes or being, untoward, like, I guess, the dangerous populist movements of the past. We just saw people getting up and casting their ballots and making a heck of an impact.
Indeed. So is part of this renewal of populism where people want to be much more active, it seems to be, is part of that just, naturally coming out of the management of COVID-19 where you had amazingly, an incredible clampdown on basic rights and freedoms that we thought we had, even on bodily autonomy of all things. So in the aftermath of that, is that part of the reaction to that?
I think so. For people who chafe under authoritarianism, I mean, that was one of the most horrible periods we've ever seen in Canadian history or world history, as far as that goes, modern wise. We realize just how far government can reach into your life under the justification of public safety. Now,
Indeed.
and people are still debating and still litigating with everything that happened at that time. But I think a lot of people got very uncomfortable and squeamish in realizing just how vulnerable we are in periods like that. I mean, as for myself, I wasn't. I don't have as much problem with the vaccination itself as a lot of people do, but I had some very serious problems with the mandates, with the coercion, with
Indeed.
the
Yes.
pressuring people into that. Likewise with the quarantines. I mean, you were separating families, and we just didn't see a demonstration of the risk that justified the amount of social damage that was caused by that government intrusion into our lives. I'm more inclined to do these things when somebody asks me to do them and reasons with me, rather than when they put the gun to the head and say, "Yeah, if you have a gathering of more than 4 people, we're going to charge you."
Exactly.
That gets my back up, and that gets people like me to say, "Well, I'm going to get active and make sure this can't happen again." And that's part of it. Getting back to Premier Kenny, even though he's more of a classical liberal kind of person, he still was of the government that clamped down on people's rights like that, and the members lashed back at him in the worst way, and it knocked himself out of power through it.
Yeah, it's a remarkable story. Well, it certainly begs the question, what are the lessons learned from the management or mismanagement of COVID-19? I certainly am very interested in this, and certainly colleagues at the frontier, especially as we compare and contrast how Sweden undertook its approach, really using best practices of public health. They did not have lockdowns anywhere like much of the rest of the world, and yet their results were stunningly positive. So I think that really begs serious questions. What are the lessons learned out of this?
Well, yeah, and I don't know if the lessons have been learned, because I'm not seeing enough discussion from people, I guess you could say, in the mainstream or legacy or major politicians pointing back and admitting this was one of the biggest overreactions to an event the world has ever seen. I mean, I'm not one of those who's saying COVID was a hoax or that it was, a government created bug to control people or anything like that. But the damage it actually caused versus and there hasn't been good evidence. We should be looking back and saying, well, let's look at things like Sweden had their results by all experts of that time. They should have had devastating infection rates and death rates, and they didn't have that. So let's examine that, because we're just one bug away from being locked down again. I don't see the checks and balances being put in place yet that are going to prevent this from happening again. And that concerns me. And I think it concerns a lot of other people. One of the big policy things that are going forward is an Albertan Bill of Rights, which we already have, but they want to amend it. And Premier Smith wants to put in factors that protect bodily autonomy from medical intervention. And boy, is she ever getting roasted for it, because they're saying she wants to offer professionals the choice to not get vaccinated if they don't want to. And the establishment is saying she's a monster for that. This is troublesome. This is just, again, going to choice. It's, why can't we reason with people to get them vaccinated? You don't have to put a gun to my head to get me to get a polio vaccine or a number of others. But again, when you will tell me I can't have a job or can't travel or a number of things because I won't take a vaccine that's just been developed within a year or two, we've got a problem. And no, I'm not really positive we've learned from it yet, unfortunately. I wish we had. I think a lot of people have, but I don't think the establishment has. And maybe that's part, again, why we're seeing people kind of rising up, because they're worried.
Well, I think you're right, Cory. In my mind, it begs the issue, and you think of good public policy, surely we would thoughtfully, at this state of the game, in the aftermath of COVID-19, reflect carefully on the evidence, the things that we know now in retrospect, be able to look at the pros and cons of issues, and frankly have an inquiry into this, to be able to, like any high-functioning organization would, be able to put everything on the table and say, what have we learned? I mean, surely that's a sign of leadership, instead of this kind of histrionic reactions and saying, oh, no, we can't talk about this, and this is off the limits. I mean, this is kind of pretty juvenile, isn't it?
It is, and governments weren't interested in having an inquiry because it would expose themselves to a degree, and they're going to wear a bit of what they find if they've overreacted or imposed bad policies at times. And we've seen the courts throwing out all sorts of charges when charges were laid against people back in that period, because once it's unfit the scrutiny of a legal authority and a judge, they say no, this is not reasonable, and they're tossing it out. Unfortunately, I mean, there was like an inquiry of people who crossed the country and held a bunch of hearings and had talks. I forget what that was called again.
The National Citizens Inquiry.
Yes, but that I found to be very, very biased with some people with some very broad anti-vaccination and general views and things like that, which kind of undermined the credibility of what they were trying to do as well. I would see speakers get up and then they'd just start talking about the chemtrails in the sky or vaccines causing autism, which are different theories about vaccines prior to COVID. And lost focus on they were more focused on the shot than on the government reaction, which is more what I'm concerned about. The government imposition of the shot, the policies, and how do we protect ourselves from having that imposed again. It should have been a public inquiry, of an official form of some kind, but it never did happen, and I'm afraid it's not going to.
Well, let's keep our eyes on that one. In the meantime, I think that part of the principal discussion here, though, is how do we empower citizens? How do we empower Canadians to live the best lives that they can? And it begs the question in my mind, what are the actions or policies that we should be promoting? I just give an example. In the field of education, surely parents are the ones to decide what is the best way to meet the unique special needs of their children so that they can grow and thrive. And so I think that's part of the reason why in Alberta the charter school movement has been a brilliant thing. How do we encourage that kind of take where we give the money to the parents, not some woke bureaucracy? Or in healthcare, how do we empower, like in Sweden, choices for citizens to make their healthcare decisions that are better for them? The list goes on and on. But are we onto something, Cory, when I talk like that?
I think we are, and it's not even convincing the government leaders, it's convincing the people. People can get a little lazy. They like saying, well, I'll just let the government take care of it. I mean, the problem with when you get all the personal freedoms is suddenly you've got a lot of personal responsibility, too. And we get a little complacent sometimes. School choice, I mean, it's brilliant, it's incredible, it's important, and it's better for all of us as a society. And I see some of the irony when we listen to teachers' unions, which I really think are a big problem. I mean, there's a lot of fantastic teachers. It's an important and difficult job, but the unions themselves, they have a different interest than the students in mind, even though they say otherwise all the time. I mean, they don't despise the students, but they're looking out for the teachers' interest first. So one of the things that I've always seen is they oppose standardized testing. They always viciously oppose that. They can't say, you can't test those children because different children learn different ways and at different rates, and it's unfair, and you don't know which. Okay, well, I can agree with that. But then shouldn't we have a whole bunch of different schools then that can address all those different needs? Oh, no, now we need standardized schools. Well, hold on. You can't have it one way and not the other, because they've taken a bit of a truth, but at the same time, they won't allow that, or they certainly don't want to allow that choice, and it's doing a disservice to everybody. I mean, there's some brilliant children coming up who are, have artistic gifts, but I mean, there's only so much resources you could have in a public school for that, or again, mechanical skills, things in the trades, they could be fantastic, and there's nothing wrong with it. But again, it's all kind of in that one homogenous public school system. We really should be looking at giving more options and letting the parents will know which inclination their child is starting to grow into. They'll have a better instinct and feeling of where their child's going to be. I mean, certainly parents can make mistakes, but they're going to be the best judges of that, or they should be. But again, the parents have to stand up and say that's part of the issue too. And sometimes it's a little easier when you've got work to deal with and everything else, and just, here's the local public school, I just want to put my kid into it, and we'll just kind of move on from there. It's not saying they're bad parents, it's just saying they're overwhelmed, and the responsibility of it just makes them less inclined to become active and pushing for actually more engagement in the educational system for them.
I think you're right, Cory. Parents can't be silent. They need to be engaged in, in this case, the education of their children. And they can't, citizenship then is not a passive sport. It's an active one, isn't it, Cory?
Absolutely. I mean, the term is participatory democracy, but it doesn't work if you don't participate.
Indeed.
And that's on every level. When I moved out of the city, I live in an acreage just outside of Calgary now, and I was active in the community association and that sort and everything in the past, but still getting to a rural environment, and it's an interesting thing. You see that rural urban split, because that's another thing politically we're really seeing right now. And boy, in the rural areas, they're just so much more engaged. There's so much more of that attitude of realizing, if we've got a problem down the road, we'll hold a public meeting and we'll see what we have to do to deal with it. Whether it's crime, whether it's potholes in a road, whether it's fixing the local park, they will get together and do this. In the city, it's always, well, the politician should deal with that. The politician should deal with that. Well, it's a different attitude, and it's not a healthy one. There's still more of that engagement and let's get things done. I mean, a realization that politicians are still important, but it's the realization that the obligation's on us, not on somebody else, to get up and pursue these changes for ourselves. And
Right on.
we need more.
No, I love it. The whole idea that we as citizens can work together as teams, and we can create community, and we can work together and row all in the same direction and get things done. That's what's built this country. And we surely don't want to forget that.
No, absolutely, and that's a little bit of what I get into in the book too. I mean, people have to learn how to participate in committees. They have to learn. It can test your patience, even if they're all well-meaning neighbors and you're all working towards something. Don't get up and stomp out of the room whenever something doesn't go your way. Have some patience. Take a breath. Go for a coffee. Skip a meeting. Come back another time. It's important to keep taking part. You won't always win every battle. And it doesn't always have to be a battle, but sometimes, yes, there's going to be community division, but the community involvement is what's important.
Right on.
And I mean, in healthcare, similarly, this is something interesting to watch with getting locally with myself in Alberta. But Premier Smith has been breaking up the very large Alberta Health Services, a huge democracy or bureaucracy that has been managing the entire system. And it's about time, so we're going to have separate mental health services. We're going to have separate long-term care for senior citizens, separate acute care, for people who have just gotten into the hospital, and primary care for people to see a doctor, because they're all health related, sure, but we're mashing it all into one facility under one bureaucracy. And of course, it's doing a terrible job for all of it. But people have to choose which one of those four branches they need to go to once they have them. And that's where it gets back to that responsibility.
It truly is remarkable. In Canada, I always marvel at how we have such incredible, dedicated people in the healthcare system. But the system design is just like out of the Stone Age, as it's like Soviet medicine. I mean, I think it's the lowest performing healthcare system in the world in the OECD index, and it's the second most expensive. And we've got waiting lists galore. And what is it, 60, 70 people tragically dying every day. I mean, it's just totally unacceptable.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's free to die on a waiting list. Well, that's not winning.
Yeah.
And we've got to drive home, because there's been a myth really driven home to Canadians for a long time that we have the best healthcare system in the planet. We don't.
No.
The CBC held their big exercise a couple of decades ago, I think now, about the greatest Canadian. Everybody selected Tommy Douglas because he founded the Canadian healthcare system, and because we'd always had it drilled into our heads that we've got this fantastic system. People, and I'm starting to see it start to leak through as people experience the system and just get that hard reality, like, this is not working. It is not serving me well. But they still got to get beyond that myth, for example, that there's two healthcare systems in the world. There's much more than the Canadian and the American one.
Yes, exactly.
And that we can still enjoy universal care, but we have to look at other models. We have to. And people are terrified of changing this system, or they've been told to be terrified of changing this system. But when I mean, it was eye-opening for me recently. My wife's mother had a stroke. We went to the Foothills Hospital in Calgary, which is, a large major hospital. And the emergency hallways, and you hear about it, but when you see it in person for real, literally people on gurneys lined up down the hallways, loved ones sitting with them because there's just no room to put them in while they wait for care. This looked like something I'd expect in a third world country, in a war zone, or if something unusual had just happened, a big accident. But this was par for the course. How on earth are we spending as much per capita as many major systems that are outperforming us? And when you go to a hospital at a time of need, that's what you are faced with. Something is not working. It's not working at all.
And it doesn't have to be. We've studied this question a lot around the frontier, and others have as well. Just go and check out other international models, whether it's Sweden, Germany, France even. I mean, there's a lot of very exciting options that could save a lot of heartache for Canadians. And shame on us for not having an adult conversation about healthcare. It's really embarrassing. So speaking of policies and citizenship, Cory, I want to get your read on some very disturbing policies on the Canadian landscape here that seem to me to be totally antithetical to our free and liberal democratic society and citizenship. And I'm thinking of these authoritarian efforts in policy. It's kind of stunning. It's almost like 1984. And you tell me if you think I'm being too dramatic. To regulate freedom of speech, to even clamp down on discussions around a range of topics, whether it's regarding the benefits of the oil and gas industry, whether it's about, God forbid, we talk about residential schools. I mean, the list goes on. Are you concerned about those things too?
I'm very concerned. And yeah, 1984 was very prescient, which is frightening in itself because, you'd think this is a book that exaggerates things. Well, we're getting right into that, guys. And with the changing media landscape, the changing ways that people are getting information, I understand that social media is barraging a lot of people with BS. That's true.
Sure.
But it's also barraging them with a lot more direct access to facts. Again, that personal responsibility thing comes in. They should be sorting through, let the good outlets, good sources rise to the top. They will. But the government saying, no, we have to intervene. We have to stop what we will consider to be misinformation. We have to clamp down on what we feel is inappropriate information getting out to people. That is very, very dangerous. And again, I don't think people understand just how dangerous that is.
But who are these people that they think they are the good and the great, and then they can start imposing on a sense that this is what you can read, this is what you can understand? I mean, this is really dangerous territory, is it not? When it comes to the fact that freedom of speech is a brilliant way that we maintain innovation, that we have healthy discussions around what we think the truth is, because we're humble enough to realize that we don't all have the answers. But somebody over there in the government halls there thinks they do. So who are these people? Who do they think they are? Do they think they're kings and queens looking over everybody else? And who are we as citizens then? Then we've become serfs, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the only rationale I can think of for people feeling that they have that right. I mean, who do you think you are to say I can't speak on this subject? You can say that I'm a jerk. You can say I'm wrong. You can say many, many things. But to say I cannot even entertain the discussion on it, to say that we can't defend an industry, that one was mind-blowing. An oil and gas industry. Yeah. This isn't talking about hate speech or anything even vaguely close. Right. We're talking about an industry that brought us up from the through the Industrial Revolution to enjoying these long lifespans and comfortable lifetimes that we have right now. And they want to illegalize these companies saying that they're doing some good works for the world. It's insane. But they're trying. The fact that they're even trying. But when a ideologue gets into power. If you look at Stephen Guilbeault, that's what he is. I mean, he's an environmental ideologue. They do feel that they know it all. They do feel that it's their obligation to control the masses. They don't think much of the citizenry, really. I mean, I got to see it. I got some early life lessons. I was very fortunate. I got to go to the Soviet Union back at the end of the 80s when it was still communist. And what was eye-opening for me, as I crossed the border, I'd crossed borders before, but they searched my bags. They weren't looking for drugs or firearms or contraband. They were looking for books and cassette tapes. That was their big focus on what they didn't want coming into their country. And from the others who were with us on that tour, they seized books if they thought they were inappropriate in cassettes. Because their biggest fear was people getting outside knowledge from other folks. I mean, this was one of the largest, nastiest authoritarian regimes of the modern world. What was their biggest fear? Information. And that hasn't changed. It's just now it's digital. And now we've got these people with that same mindset trying to figure out how they can play whack-a-mole and stop that information from getting to other individuals. And that's where we see bills, 63, 18, 11. I mean, there's so much focus on trying to shut down discourse. We should all have our alarm bells going off. And something I say in the book, too, and just in general, we've got to watch it. I mean, Pierre Poilievre, I think he'll be much better for Canada should he become prime minister than Trudeau, in my view. But once you're in there, my role will change as a columnist. I'm going to start picking at you, and I'm going to start dissecting your policies, and I'm going to be critical, and you're not going to like that. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he has that authoritarianism where he would crack down on my ability, but he might not be feeling quite as eager to take away those controls that were already there as he had been when he's on the way up.
But isn't that the punchline, Cory? Is that power a la Lord Acton? Power corrupts, and ultimate power corrupts absolutely. So we desperately need to maintain these traditions and wisdom of checks on power so that there's room for citizens to be active and help shape our country together. Isn't that the point?
Exactly. And we are the check. We are the balance. And we do have the system. Like I said, I rail against the system, but we do have good democratic controls. The people who drafted that Constitution weren't all that bad. It's just out of date in a lot of ways, particularly regionally. Right. But we have a lot of ability as citizens, as individuals, to hold our politicians to account and get ourselves government. But we have to do it. And again, the ones who don't feel that we should do it. I mean, another aspect of the pandemic times, think about, one of the things authoritarians, the first things they do if it's a terrible time too, is they shut down the ability to gather in large groups. It would be illegal in East Berlin, to have more than 5 people on the street at the same time after a certain hour, because it's not for public health. It's just they don't want people organizing to pressure against the government. That wasn't the motivation of stopping people, I think, from gathering when it came to COVID, but the fact that they intruded on a right that is so important and precious, people don't realize that right to assembly, that right to gather, again, it should set off alarm bells for a lot more people right now. Like,
absolutely, Cory. Let's be real. It was kind of a crock. If you have people, you could go to the liquor store, you could go to Walmart, but you sure couldn't worship.
No.
How do you square that circle? It's beyond me.
They were pretty darn selective with their enforcement.
No, it's pretty ridiculous. So as we wrap up today's far-ranging discussion, and this has been a great discussion, Cory, what can we as citizens do? What's your top 2 lists that we should be doing as citizens? Job 1.
Job 1, get engaged somewhere. Look around yourself. Just see what you can do, because you know what, it's satisfying. It can be fun. Start small, join your local community association, or if you're more political, join a constituency association with a party, whether they have a seat or not. Just get involved, go to a meeting, take part. It really can be fun, it can be satisfying, and it leads to positive change. The other aspect, I guess, is just getting back to community outside of organized things. The thing I missed, I didn't see in the city that I'm enjoying down here in the rural area. Get out and talk to your neighbors. Don't call bylaw when you got a problem with them. Right on. Knock on the door and see if you can reason with them. Sometimes the neighbor's just a jerk and nothing's going to work besides a bylaw. Fair enough. But you know what? Start with the door knock. Don't start with the enforcement. And I think we'll all be a lot better for it.
I'm with you, Cory Morgan. Thanks so much for talking with us today about citizenship in Canada, and all the best.
Oh, thanks. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.